Hercules, Achilles, Ulysses, Diomedes. These are the great solar heroes of yore, of olden days of yore and lore and exciting things such as this. Oh, it gets the blood boiling, it gets you all excited when you want to talk about them heroes. Where'd those heroes go? Where'd they go? Why don't we have any modern heroes these days? Tales of excitement, tales of braveness and glory. Well, we do. Where'd they go? Oh, they went to the WWE. That's where they went. Wrestlers are our modern day solar heroes. Think I'm joking? Friends, I am not kidding. Topic to try and join astrology and wrestling. This might seem really weird, and yet in my mind they're just inextricably linked, because when I started studying astrology, I was concurrently, right at the beginning when I really started digging into it and researching this, I was watching a lot of old 80's wrestling and really just enjoying the way that these literally larger than life characters could play a crowd, could get your emotions going, could just do the most absurd things and then be taken seriously as these powerful heroes. I realized, as I was watching these shows, how easy it was to pick out the sun signs of these wrestlers and the characters they were portraying. Now, in general, when you meet someone, you meet their ascendant first. The ascendant is sometimes more easy to capture than the sun. You have to spend a little bit of time with someone to see their sun. But in creating these characters that are supposed to live out people's dreams and fulfill these quest-like matches of mythical proportions, it turns out that they seem to be accessing their sun, their solar energy, their heart, the core of who they are, the core of what their dreams are, the core of what their hopes are for the future. And it seems like Vince McMahon had this interesting ability, because some of these characters he really sort of dictated and helped create. Some of them came from inside the person themselves, but it seems like he had an innate sense of drawing out the solar potential of these wrestlers and turning them into vast superstars. He seems to understand this, as even WrestleMania 6 began with placing Warrior and Hulk Hogan into the sky as constellations, which is what we've always done with our solar heroes, of course. Now, in modern days, sun sign astrology has gotten kind of a bad rap because it's the only thing most people know about astrology is their sun sign, and very generalized newspaper clippings are their interface with it. For people who get much out of that, it's a very shallow layer of astrology, but it's also this layer of astrology that's the most popular, that's used to debunk it all the time. So there's kind of a knee-jerk reaction to this from people in the astrological community, but today we're just going to dig into it. We're only looking at the sun signs of these characters. We're going to go through the whole Zodiac as wrestlers, portraying all the categories of what each sign makes it special and unique, and an important analytical tool for determining what happens in each sign of the Zodiac. So there's going to be no natal charts today. Nothing up here obscuring these horrifying paintings. It's just going to be me talking. And maybe we'll get to look at some fantastic wrestler bods. We'll see. Whew. Distracted there for a minute. Anyways, so the first category we're going to talk about before we get into any of the specific wrestlers, and what made me start to really question, is it possible that Vince McMahon is a master astrologer? Just like Chris Carter was? No, Chris Carter wasn't a master astrologer. He just hired one. No, but maybe Vince McMahon really knows what he's talking about. Or maybe it's just that these archetypes keep playing out all the time on every layer of reality, and they're just there. And when someone starts accessing, especially these deep mythological themes and resonances, and gets the energy of a crowd of thousands of people into it, well, it just starts to hum with planetary energy. But I am reminded of the old saying, millionaires don't use astrology, but billionaires do. So the interesting thing is that in the early days of WWE, in the 80s, when it started to take off, he launched it with WrestleMania into like a national sphere. He wound up over the course of the next few years coming up with 4 major pay-per-views. And it struck me that the nature of these 4 major pay-per-views all align with the light cycle of the seasons, the 4 seasons. So he started off in the spring with WrestleMania. And WrestleMania always takes place within the sign of Aries, the cardinal sign of the beginning of spring. Most people begin the Zodiac here. But there's a powerful point to be made that all cycles actually begin at the darkest point. It begins at the winter solstice. Just like a new moon is the darkest point of that moon, and it determines the whole cycle. So is the year. We celebrate New Year's right after the winter solstice, which is kind of strange. I never quite figured that one out. But at any rate, it is at the darkest time of year. And so this is one area of astrology that's been almost lost to the ages, and seemingly very few people use it practically. However, I come from a school, that taught me about this. The yin and the yang of the year is dark and light. The zodiac in the ancient cosmology was a sphere beyond the fixed stars. So there are branches of astrology which use the sidereal movement of the stars, and they progress the zodiac every 72 years, 1 degree, to go along with the tilt of the Earth's axis. But in branches of ancient Western astrology, they understood that the zodiac was a sphere outside of the fixed stars, which never changed. Practically, it's actually, the Earth's orbit around the sun, and so it's actually inner. It's more inner than the fixed stars. But from a metaphysical standpoint, we see that the stars move through the zodiac over time, and slowly the constellations can change their meaning. And there is some evidence of this. Once upon a time in Egypt, the lion heralded spring. Think about that. It's a very different lion, isn't it, than lazy dog days Leo we know now. I'm not dissing Leos. I'm not dissing anybody. Listen, we're about honoring the zodiac here, honoring the signs of the zodiac. So beginning WrestleMania in the spring, at the vernal equinox, we have more light than dark, and the momentum of light is gaining every day. There's a little more sun. There's a little more sun. And what this means is that's maximum yang energy. And the yang energy is the creative, independent, individual energy. So for him to launch WrestleMania in Aries, it's a profound point. Not only that, but he chose a Sunday. And almost every single WrestleMania and every single pay-per-view he made after this was on a Sunday. Sunday, literally. Oh, you didn't know that the days of the week were named after the 7 classical planets? Well, there you go. You're that much closer to being a wizard. And what do we see with WrestleMania? It's the number 1 place for him to change the top belt. That's where you're most likely to see the most prime indicator of individual success in wrestling. This belt, this giant golden belt. Gold, the sun. Whoa, I just came up with that one. I forgot. The golden belt. We're off. So the golden belt is generally the main event of WrestleMania. It is the ultimate independent yang energy pay-per-view. Then we move into the summer. He created SummerSlam. Now, an interesting thing about SummerSlam is once you get to the summer solstice, there's still more light energy than dark energy. but the light's waning every day. It's going back. The yin is returning. There's a momentum towards the other. There's a momentum to the team again. And what do we see in SummerSlams? Frequently, in the early days, the main event of SummerSlam was a tag team. It was two people working together. It's not as much about changing the belt, but it's still independent and individual glory, but there's a team returning. And so we see this in the summer signs. And generally, SummerSlam would take place in the early days. It was in Virgo, so it was at the end of summer, the most yin that can come back within the summer signs. Virgo was the most team-oriented of the summer signs, but it would migrate back and forth between Leo and Virgo. So you see Leo where the sun has its home, and Virgo. But there might be a reason why Vince likes Virgo season, which maybe we'll get to later. We'll see. From here, from the autumnal equinox on, there's more darkness than light, and the darkness is gaining. It's gaining traction every single day. So here we have the most group effort, the most group reward. The fall signs are the people most motivated by others and by being part of the team. And what's the pay-per-view that he goes to in the fall? Survivor Series. Oh, the entire gimmick of this event is he would build these massive 6-people teams where they were all together and working against another 6-person team, or the numbers would change, and the amount that they would rely on that gimmick changed over the years. But another interesting point of Survivor Series is that's the one pay-per-view that he didn't primarily book on a Sunday. So where the sun has the least energy in the fall, he would book it on Thanksgiving or on Thanksgiving Eve, and then eventually he did migrate over to Sundays because I think it was a better business decision. But even that's interesting, because you'd think Saturday you'd have a bigger chance for people to be staying out late and watching oh man, what are they up to, 7 hours now? Woo! At any rate, he chooses Sundays. And for the fall Survivor Series, it's almost always in Sag season, mutable again, but fire. So we see this accentuation on the 3 fire signs, the most pushing, driving, energy, action-oriented signs for wrestling, of course. Wouldn't you choose that to be your pay-per-views? Once we get past the fall, we move into the winter. At the winter solstice, the sun starts to pick up pace again. It starts to move a little bit further north, day by day. We get a little bit more sun. The sun's a little bit further overhead. In the northern hemisphere, we'll leave the southern hemisphere to another day. We don't want to talk about that right now. So in the winter, we have the Royal Rumble. Now the light's returning. There's more of an emphasis on going towards being independent, but these people are still primarily controlled by the group. Well, what does he do? He puts 30 men into a ring at once and has them fight for dominance in a ring. And it sort of mimics this idea of being trapped in a house when it's so cold outside you can't even leave the front door. And families, start to get fed up of each other because there's not the freedom of spring and summer. Or if you're trapped in a house with a bunch of people and you just want to farm out, it's perfect. Fascinating. But he actually, as the years went on, used the Royal Rumble as a means to see who would get a title shot at WrestleMania. So you see there the momentum from the group moving back to independent glory. So now I've given you a perspective that not a lot of astrologers see, which is just simply the light cycle of the Zodiac. Now let's move from this into the reason why this episode has been on my mind for such a long time, which is that when I was learning astrology, I was watching a documentary on Andre the Giant, who was, I'm sure as a child, the reason why I got into wrestling in the first place. He was just such an amazing creature to look at, just his physique and the intensity, the charisma of this man. I don't want to undersell that. In fact, I want to oversell that, which everyone had to do when they would fight Andre. But as a child, I wanted to be Andre. I wanted to be that big, powerful, and just have presence in the room that you couldn't deny. Oh, showing my Leo ascendant again. Okay, forget about that. So as I'm watching this documentary, it starts to, just this voice is in the back of my head going, this man's a Taurus. This man's a Taurus. This man is such a Taurus. These legendary stories of him drinking 150 beers and just the vibe of him. There's a certain thing about sun sign energy There's just a vibe about those signs. They might have studies saying astrologers can't pick out a psychological profile and match it to a natal chart. But you need to be in the room. You need to even just see them on a video and hear them talk. There's a certain energy where a good astrologer is well above chance when it comes to just picking sun sign, let alone adding in the ascendant. So while watching a documentary, you're getting a sense of the background life of this person, that Andre loved food and he loved drinks and he wanted comfort. And the tragedy of Andre's life is because he had this gigantism, which made him this amazing, just unique human being, physically anyways. The rest was all him. Because his body never stopped growing. And instead of getting the surgery to remove the tumor on his pituitary gland, which was causing him to just have excessive growth hormone, he thought it would negatively impact his career. Of course, it wound up ending his life much sooner than it had to. And if you know The Big Show, he also had gigantism but had the surgery and was able to maintain a career for a much longer amount of time. So the first thing to talk about is Taurus is an earth sign. Earth is practical, it's grounded, and it's ruled by Venus. Every sign has a planetary ruler. Taurus is the feminine sign ruled by Venus. He loved good food, good wine, and demanded companionship. Whenever he'd go to one of the territories, they'd pick someone to be his chauffeur and to just kind of hang out with Andre, and he would demand you try to keep up with him drinking, which is insane. What a character, man. But the sort of tragic thing about Andre is that he was too big for everything. He was too big for toilets. He was too big for airplanes. His whole life was this struggle of trying to fit into a box that was too small for him, which is a tragedy for a Taurus because they're most interested in comfort. They're most interested in what's beautiful and nice to their particular tastes. So Andre, with his money, because he was one of the biggest drawing stars of all time, he built a house, he had a ranch, and he just designed it for his body, and that's just where he wanted to be. But he was a businessman too. He was practical. That's part of the earth element. He was a practical man. And so he would do what was right for the business all the time. But if he didn't like you, because remember, we're in the spring, I'm going to bring back the yang energy again, because it's a spring sign, with all the yang, Taurus are primarily for themselves. They're primarily about their own comfort and what they want. And Andre was notorious about you had to respect Andre first, or he would just kick the crap out of you in the ring, because nobody could move this behemoth. He could do whatever he wanted to you, because he was extremely strong as well. Most of the video we have of him is from the later years when his gigantism was getting the better of him and he had serious back problems. And I mean, you can see it. It's tragic. And yet he was still an extraordinarily strong man and powerful. And if you disrespected him in any way, he would take it out on you on the ring. Famously, he'd sit on you and fart on you. He loved it. There's so many stories of his flatulence, which is, part of his overindulgence in the finer things in life. But there's all kinds of different pathways we can walk down here for assessing how these wrestlers and the characters in the ring portrayed the signs that their sun was in. And remember, we're not going to look at the rest of the chart because there's all these different elements that go into how someone portrays themselves, how they would create a character like this. Because the amazing thing about wrestling is it's physical, it's artistic, it's mercurial. You have to be able to talk on a mic and be able to tell a story, and you need to have charisma to connect with the audience and be an amazing physical specimen. And it's on and on and on. This is why the sun at the center of the solar system ties it all together and becomes the heart and becomes the main thing that most of these wrestlers relied on to create their characters, unknowing to themselves, I'm sure, for the most part. We do have examples of, since we're on Taurus, there's a few examples like The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, is also a Taurus, and he would use a bull sign, and so there's a few that were more conscious of their astrology and would kind of make it part of their gimmick. But here's one element of Taurus. Every astrological sign rules a body part, okay? Taurus rules the throat. Well, what's one of Andre's main moves when you think about the moves he would do? Well, one of them is he would get up and he'd be towering over them and he would choke their throat. And it's terrifying, his big bulging eyes. Ah! Oh! Great. I mean, choking someone in the throat isn't going to look, it looks like kind of a wimpy move to a certain extent. But when Andre's doing it, it's absolutely terrifying. Whew. And what's his other move? He'd kind of just fall on guys because they couldn't move him. Like, that's one. And I want to talk about a specific time that this was used by Andre. But yeah, he would get comfortable in the ring. He'd hang on the ropes and he'd kind of get them into the corner. He loved being in the corner. It's all like Tyrian comfort, how he would use the ring. Even when he'd fall out of the ring, it was done in like a Venusian, comfortable way. And he's just a beautiful character that I can't stop thinking about, and he plays this archetypal role in my head from my childhood. Andre never needed the belt. He was such a big draw, there was no point in putting the belt on him. And frankly, Taurus isn't all about their own glory. Taurus just wants to be comfortable and happy and left alone sometimes. So Andre did what was good for the business, and they kept the belt on other people that needed that boost. He never did. And so let's think about what was his most famous rivalry he ever had. Well, let's think about the Zodiac here, and we're not gonna go around the Zodiac in a normal way because there's nothing normal about me. We're gonna do aspects and show how the aspects between these signs relate to the plot lines of these characters. So his most famous rivalry, of course, is perhaps the most famous rivalry and perhaps most famous wrestling match of all time, which is Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 3. And no, I forgot to say, I missed this part. Taurus is a fixed sign. Fixed is the middle part of every season. This is where the season is at its most stable, it's most like the type of season it's going to be. Fixed people are stubborn people. They like things the way they are, and they're not prone to changing things. Now, when you're looking at the fixed signs, in a way, Taurus is the most fixed sign because of the light balance in the spring, where not only are these extremely fixed, set in their ways people, but they're also kind of selfish. They just kind of want what they want, right? So what we see with Andre in the ring is he becomes the ultimate immovable object. It's such a beautiful Tyrian analogy, because if you've ever tried to get a Taurus to do something they don't want to do, you're gonna think you're trying to pick up Andre the Giant and slam him when he doesn't want it. That's exactly what it's like. Oh, and just look at him move around the ring. He's gonna do what he wants to do, man. He's a Taurus. Just keep this in the back of your mind. Maybe I won't bring it up again, but the fixed wrestlers, you might note, tend to rely on the same moves more and the same types of matches. You know, they have more of a comfort zone. Speaking of people considering the comfort zone with their matches, Hulk Hogan. Now, my opinions on Hulk Hogan might best be described as Gnostic. Maybe I'll leave it at that. But for the people who criticize his matches and say he had a small moveset and wasn't as dynamic as other wrestlers, you can find these videos of him in Japan where he was outside of his main domain, and especially when he's playing a heel. And he's going well outside. He's able to grapple on the floor, and he has all kinds of different moves. But he was playing a specific type of solar archetype in the WWE. And the moves that he does when he's playing that specific version of himself have the most gravity and weight. And they play out as him being Leo, the king, Leo, the lion. And right off the bat, when I was watching that Andre documentary, I was thinking about, well, what about these other wrestlers? The next one was Hulk Hogan, and immediately, if you ask yourself, of course he's a Leo. There was no way he was going to be anything else. Even when he was bald on the top, he still had to have the long blonde hair. And here's another thing, the colors. Pythagoras discussed how the color wheel is mapped to the Zodiac. And it's very obvious. You'll see different color schemes in different systems. But the one that I use, and has profound meaning, as taught to me by Robin Armstrong, but was discussed by Pythagoras, by the way, so there's a long tradition there, is everyone agrees Aries is red and Leo is yellow. If you add blue for Sag, You got the primary colors for the fire signs, then you add the secondary colors for the air signs, and then you fill it in with the tertiary colors around. And it maps quite well to the light cycle that we talked about. So Hogan wears yellow, he has the blonde hair, the blonde mustache. It couldn't be more perfect. And also, he has to be the star all the time. If there's anything that bothers me about Hogan, is that he would come and go from territories and companies, and he just had to win the belt every time. He had to be the top star. The Yokozuna one is it's one of the grossest wrestling booking decisions I've ever seen. But anyways, so again we have another fixed sign. He tended to have the same end to his matches, the same moves, the moveset that would end his matches. So Andre and Hogan being in a square, all of the same modes, fixed, mutable, cardinal. If you have two fixed modes, they're in a contradictory, difficult pattern to each other, a square or an opposition. They tend to have conflict. It's like too similar, you know? Two stubborn people, stubborn in totally different ways. Now, as far as I know, actually in real life, Andre and Hogan got along together, but this really epic, major event they had at WrestleMania 3, which was the biggest wrestling event of all time, Hogan had the belt and Andre was the challenger, and Hogan wanted to map it out. He wanted to make sure he had all his ducks in a row, and the match was going to go the way he wanted. And Andre just don't worry about it, boss. Don't worry about it, boss. At least this is Hogan's story, but being a Leo, there could be a little bit of a exaggeration. You know, it's hard to know with any wrestler because they ascribe to kayfabe, even as kayfabe has been completely dropped and no one honors it anymore. It's still hard to trust some of these guys because they grew up in a business where lying was their bread and butter. So Hogan, being a fire sign ruled by the sun, wants the maximum glory and wants to make sure he holds on to his belt, but he's not able to get Andre to settle on what the match is going to be. And so he goes in there, and this is, if you watch this match, and you can find the whole thing on YouTube. This is an example of the kind of mythical weight that these matches could have and these characters could portray in the ring. Just the energy of the crowd feeding into these big, larger-than-life movements which work on that stage in this giant stadium. And very early on in the match, Hogan goes to slam Andre, and they've been playing this fake card that Andre had never been slammed before. Of course, he was slammed all the time. He'd let you slam him if he liked you. Another very Tyrian thing, because he knew how to just jump up and use his own weight to get people to slam him. Of course, he couldn't pick that up yourself, that's for darn sure. So he goes to slam him, but Andre just uses his weight. He doesn't go for it. He falls over, falls on Hogan, and watch Hogan squirm to get out of there. And I don't know if it was a shoot. I don't know if it was Andre playing into smart fans who kind of were wondering if it was fake or real and wondering what was going on, or if just in the moment he was taking a nap, but Andre's not moving for that count, and Hogan has to fight to get out of that pin. It's incredible. It's a very cool moment, and it's hard to know exactly what was going on. Maybe the whole mythology that Hogan's created afterwards is fake, and that was part of what they wanted to do in that match. But it works. All I can say is that it works. Leo rules the heart, and Hogan's gimmick was say your prayers, take your vitamins, train every day. I forget what the whole thing was, but it was this real American hero thing they were going for. The king, right? He was the king of the company. And also, Leo the cat. I actually have footage of Hulk Hogan hacking up a hairball just to prove my point.
Thank you, Hulk Hogan. Let's get back to action.
Now, Hogan had another rivalry, another feud, which many consider to be the greatest wrestling feud of all time. Let's take another square from Hogan up to Scorpio. We're getting there already, which is an incredible example of astrology in wrestling, because they actually use the most negative connotations of Scorpio to create this entire feud. Who are we talking about here? Oh yeah! That's where we're at. Randy Macho Man Savage. Well, this gets interesting, because Scorpio is in the negative context. And of course, there's a negative and a positive to every sign. This is a range of human experience here. Negatively, Scorpio can be very possessive and controlling. And this is basically the main character attribute which Randy Savage used. In fact, he used his real relationship to his wife as his main wrestling gimmick when he came into the WWE because he wanted her on the road with him. He wanted to keep an eye on her. So this is where wrestling kayfabe and reality cross, which they did frequently. If there was a feud between two wrestlers, the bookers would, in the backstage in the locker room, bookers would book it because they knew they'd get maybe some real action in the ring. It'd get a little more heated. And they loved that stuff. And then it also made kayfabe more real, you see. So they worked this angle for over a year. They had it planned out exactly what they wanted, which was that Randy and Hogan would work together, but Randy would slowly become jealous of Hogan and Elizabeth's relationship. And they played this into Randy being this maniacal, controlling, essentially abusive partner is what it certainly looks like. In kayfabe, at least. Now, of course, there are positive elements to Scorpio as well. The deep intensity. And let's not forget, it's Mars ruled. That's one thing a lot of people miss. It's Mars ruled. Mars is the muscles and the energy. Mars rules Scorpio, and Scorpio is a water sign. Now, you don't often think of martial energy with water, but in fact, there's a close relationship there. That's one of the rulerships. But this is where we get the worst element, which is because water is very judgmental. It's emotional and very feeling-oriented. But when those emotions get spurned, that's where the martial energy comes, and the legendary don't cross a Scorpio because their wrath is so intense and focused, laser focused on revenge. And of course, this is where we get great wrestling feuds out of. Amazing. Scorpio is also often considered to be deeply interested in the occult, and I found a couple really interesting things here. We've got a clip. Well, watch this.
Got my head together later that night. I stared at a candle and I said, Randy Savage, you are going to be the greatest at something someday, yeah.
So he's staring into candles? He's got this so-called overlay? Amazing. Let's just bring up now that Macho Man was one of the greatest promos of all time. Just a joy to watch his intensity and going low and so this cadence was amazing. But that's emotional water able to really connect on a different level, right? But I found another one which people have made fun of. They think this is hilarious, but I don't think they see what's actually going on there.
Second word.
All right.
Pump.
Pumping iron. Yeah, Hulk Hogan doesn't have the only key to the gym, I'm there every morning, yeah.
Gun.
What was it?
Gun.
Gun. Fastest gun in the West, East, South, and North.
So people thought it was hilarious that he points down for north and up for south. But this is how an astrologer views a natal chart. We're always facing south. The midheaven is towards the south, the opposite of which is the highest point that anything gets on the ecliptic. We look at the noonday, we look at the sun towards the south. And the opposite point of that, the IC, is north. It's behind us. Most people are used to seeing a map where the south is the bottom and the north is the top. So it's very interesting to me that Randy would have done it that way. Is it possible that Randy, as a Scorpio, is interested in astrology? Just let me look at this chart here. Now if I can just put Hogan into a rest hold for another 5-10 minutes, I could drop the elbow from the top rope just as Mars hits the midheaven. Yeah. What? Isn't it very good? Randy, I'm sorry. I didn't practice that. Just put my shirt back on. I don't have a Randy Macho Man physique. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. So Scorpio is again a fixed sign, as we see the conflict with him and Hogan, and him and Andre, by the way. They had their own feuds. So Savage was a fixed sign, the obsessive Scorpio energy. Savage, legendarily, would script his entire matches top to bottom, at least when he got into the WWE. obsessively. We go back to WrestleMania 3, his match with Ricky the Steamboat was considered one of the greatest matches of all time, and actually upstaged Hogan and Andre for a lot of people. There's stories of them where they would go over. He had like 150 different points to it or something along these lines, where he'd say, point 120. And Ricky would have to go, oh, I drop the elbow, and then we get into an arm bar, and then I reverse it, and he'd have to go through the whole match from that point. And I mean, it worked for them. There's most wrestlers, and most wrestling is actually improvised. They know the finish, but they go through and they kind of call it in the ring, and the referee has a certain angle to play with that. But Macho, in a very scorpionic way, wanted to understand every second of the match. So we've explored, a couple squares here, hinted at an opposition. Why don't we relax a little bit? Let's just chill out, okay? And we'll explore a trine, which is, an element of ease. We're going to go from one water sign to another water sign instead of tracking the modes, which have a bit more conflict. When we look at the elements, these tend to get along better. And so we'll go from Randy to Bret the Hitman Hart.
Who was a person that every time you got in there, you're like, I know this is going to be a dream, and I know it's going to look good?
Macho Man was another one, where you didn't need to even talk. Like, you could just, if someone said, quick, run out there, you got to go 20 minutes with Macho Man, and we don't know what you're doing. Just figure it out on the fly. And I've done that with Macho Man.
Bret the Hitman Hart now is a Cancer, and this one is really interesting because Cancer is moon ruled. Moon is the mother and home, and there's an element of protection and safety and taking care of others with the moon. And Bret the Hitman Hart brags incessantly about the fact that he never hurt a wrestler in the ring. I don't know if that's true, but he certainly says it enough. And it's well known, if you watch Bret the Hitman Hart's wrestling style, that he was very safe. He was very safe. He would almost never even go to the top rope. He'd go to Bret's rope, the second buckle, to do his little elbow drops and stuff. But he was a master of in-ring psychology and, a water sign. These people understand each other's emotions. And he knew how to connect with the crowd through the match. He wasn't charismatic on the mic, but many people consider him one of the best of all time in the ring. He'd take these long matches where, hopefully nobody would get hurt. And I discussed the Pythagorean color system, but there's other color systems as well. In Jyotish, Cancer is given to pink. And I was always very curious that Bret Hart would be in pink, the Hart Foundation, but there's a connection between Hart and pink, and it seemed to make sense, but he didn't even like it. He didn't like the pink color. It was put on him by the company, so there's another question there I have, but let's not worry about it. His finishing hold was a rest hold, which is kind of interesting in a way, this closeness between the two wrestlers. It was called the sharpshooter, and he would pull them back and put pressure. Now, Cancer rules the stomach and the breasts, and he would kind of put pressure on where the back, right around the stomach, seems to be where the real pain would be, pressing in as he'd sit on them and pull them back. Now, Cancer's a cardinal sign. It's the first cardinal sign we'll get to today, which is pushing. It's the beginning of a season. It's driving, and he was placed as this amazing tag team with Jim the Anvil Neidhart, which brings us to another interesting point, which is that Cancer is the sign most closely associated to family. And Bret the Hitman Hart came from this legendary wrestling family from Calgary, and Jim the Anvil Neidhart was his brother-in-law, and he wrestled a lot with the British Bulldog, who was another brother-in-law, and then his actual brothers. So there's this strong family connection with Bret Hart. And there's loyalty there too, because Cancer is very interested in comfort, sort of like Taurus in a way. Taurus is more about independent physical comfort, being an earth sign, whereas Cancer, being a water sign, is more about emotional comfort, more about comfort with others around them. So Cancer wants to be close to people and keep those people under their control, keep them close. Because note, there's another thing a lot of people don't realize. Cancer comes right after the summer solstice. While there's a momentum towards the other in Cancer, it's actually a very yang energy. Yang. It's a very yang energy. When they find someone they're comfortable with, they want to control the situation and control others around them. And Bret was willing to leave this very successful tag team he had with Jim in order to find independent glory. So there still was a strong yang energy within him. And he did. It took him a long time because McMahon in those days didn't want anyone who wasn't, Hulk Hogan to be the champion. And Bret got there. But he had to work hard for it. That brings us to another really, really interesting element of Cancer, which is that being so family-oriented, it also becomes connected to nationalism and connected to this sense of national pride. Bret was a heel as a tag team partner. They were heels, but he didn't have to talk on the mic, and he wasn't a focus. It was the team. And so he seemed to be comfortable being a heel, and Jim was really good on the mic, so it'd be more like the in-ring stuff would be Bret. It was a really beautiful mix between these two characters. Jim was a bit bigger and, more of a tough guy attitude, and Bret would be the technician. And when it came to the promos, Bret would just kind of get to stand there and just look brooding, like he's in a bad Cancer mood, like his moon, which is also emotions, and internal emotional processing, like he was in a bad mood. But Jim could be tugging on his goatee and everything. When Bret tried to move up into the singles territory, which is more independent glory than being a tag team, and bigger money eventually, he had to figure out how to do these promos and how to make it work for himself. And so when he finally became a fan favorite, and they decided to turn him heel, which is the bad guy character, he had such a hard time with that, which is an interesting Cancerian thing. He got emotional about it. Whereas other wrestlers would turn heel and face on a dime, he really, really struggled with this. And he found this compromise, which is incredible. It's this beautiful Cancerian thing where he said, well, I still have to be a babyface in Canada. So he did this amazing run where he was the Canadian dissing Americans, making a lot of valid criticisms of America from a Canadian perspective. And so he would be hated in America and loved in Canada. It's phenomenal. It's this using the nationalism of Cancer as this core principle, which was also just who he was internally. At a certain point, Bret Hart actually turned down a far more lucrative contract with WCW, an immensely more lucrative contract, because of his loyalty to Vince McMahon and to the WWE. It took him feeling betrayed by Vince McMahon when he turned him heel to actually make the move to WCW. Again, this is Cancerian loyalty to emotional comfort. And then, of course, this leads to the Montreal Screwjob, which people know so much about, where they wanted to get the belt off him, but he didn't want to drop the belt in Montreal, in Canada. And so, who knows? I mean, the lines between reality and fiction and in this stuff are so blurred, it's hard to know when they're playing a game with you and playing a game with your emotions and when it's real. Which is what makes it such a fascinating thing to watch. But to this day, there's debates on whether the whole thing was a work or whether it was a shoot and blah, 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 blah. At any rate, they got Shawn Michaels to put him in his own hold, and then the ref just tapped out right away, even though Bret didn't tap out and claimed that he'd lost. And Bret took that to heart as a Cancer. He never understood that it was just business. He couldn't. It was personal to him. So Cancerian. Kind of beautiful. But generally, the modes have a hard time with each other. So let's jump up. We'll do a square again. Let's jump over to Aries. Now we're going to go way back in time to one of my favorites, another Canadian, Roddy Piper. So now we're in Aries, Cardinal Spring. This is the fire, Cardinal Spring, Mars ruled. I mean, this is you'd think this is peak wrestling right there. All just go get 'em energy. Start. The thing about Aries is it's an energy of just go, just do it. It's energy to just move forward. Not always energy to follow up on things. But I bring up Roddy Piper and Bret the Hitman Hart because Aries at its best is a very honorable energy. It's the brave knight who charges into battle with no concern for themselves. Just because it's the right thing to do and because they got to expend their energy somehow, so they may as well be virtuous about it. And Rowdy did have a famous match, which was at the beginning of Bret moving up into the singles card. And as this more prominent veteran, he put Bret over. He lost the match for him. And he said that he thought Bret was the best in the world. And he was so happy to do that for him. He had this virtuous take on it, which is Aries at the highest level. And Roddy did say that his match with Bret Hart was his favorite match of all time, which goes to show you that while the squares can mean conflict, you need conflict to create things in the world. And the trines and the sextiles, which are the easier energy, aren't always as useful as a good square. Of course, Roddy Piper was also a controversial character. He did some things in his promos where Aries is not the most concerned about offending people or about how they're taken. They're just out there. They're just putting energy out constantly.
I'll be Bad News Brown, and Roddy Piper, you ain't nothing but a spine and cockroach. First of all, cockroaches don't have a spine. They got a hard shell. So we know two things about you. You're a jerk and you're stupid.
I mean, Piper was so hated, he got stabbed 3 times. 3 times! In reality. For real. He made the fans hate him so much. He got stabbed 3 times. And you need to understand that Aries is ruled by Mars. And Mars happens to rule knives and stabbings. Ha! But he was an amazing promo. He was able to just get people fired up. And he generally was a heel, even though he was one of these heels that was so beloved. People loved to hate him so much that he flipped into a babyface over the years. But just, you look at his speaking style, it's very brisk and to the point. He's just he's snarling like a dog and just and just insulting people and just, it's fantastic. But his whole in-ring style, there's an Aries energy to it. So Aries rules the head, and Roddy he was a boxer, he was into punching, and just there's a certain element to that. It was all about his face. He had a face that he could just make you hate and love at the same time, which is the key to the best wrestling heels. And he had it. And in fact, he wound up, a big part of his career was he would have the Piper's Pit, where he would have interviews with people because he was so good on the mic. And that some of the most famous plot points in wrestling history happened in the Piper's Pit. As I mentioned, the color of Aries is red. Roddy Piper was always wearing red. It was his main color. So let's take another square, and we're going to go up all the way to the darkest point of the year, where glory is just returning. Capricorn. Oh, we've got a doozy for Capricorn. This is one of my faves. Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man. So Capricorn here is an earth sign, ruled by Saturn. Saturn, the structure of things, the edge of the visible solar system. It's always been about rules and structure. And there's a certain amount of dignity and status within Saturn as well. Well, Ted DiBiase, and it's cardinal. So Capricorn is like boss energy. But it's not boss energy for some wild, out of control ego. Capricorn is a practical energy. It's about creating things in the world. And DiBiase often would say, if you listen to an interview with him these days, he just keeps saying, I didn't need the belt. I didn't want the belt. It was about making money. It's all about making money. It's about practically making the money. $1 Million Man. His gimmick was given to him by Vince McMahon, and he actually would first off pay for limousines and the most expensive hotels for him to stay in because he had to maintain this character outside of the ring, which is pretty hilarious to think about. Of course, created, I'm sure, jealousy with a lot of the other guys. And also would give him $2,000 of pocket money that he would keep replenishing because he would ask him to go into just restaurants and say, I'm the $1 Million Man and here I am to buy everyone's meal, and just to keep this character going out in the world. I'm so great, look at me. So the thing about Capricorn is being practical and Saturn ruled and cardinal. It is about driving to make things happen in the world. It's about what's practical. This is why they make very good bosses, because they're not ego run. It's not an egocentric sign. It is as dark as it can get, but there's a certain momentum towards their own prominence and importance, and you need some yang in a boss, of course. You can't be all yin. Cardinal is yang to begin with. Now, DiBiase was one of the best wrestlers at the time. People considered him one of the best workers. He could do Broadway matches where they'd go an hour long, no problem. He could make these matches work. And yet when he went to the WWF, he became a cartoon character. He gladly took on this role of the $1 Million Man. Why? Because as a Capricorn, he's about what works. what makes money. He didn't mind that he wasn't being pushed to be the greatest wrestler of all time. He didn't mind that he was no longer a babyface, as he was usually in the territories. He was just, hey man, I'm making money, let's do it. A Capricorn rules the knees, which I find interesting because he very conspicuously would wear knee pads. I'll just point that out. Protecting Saturn, caution. Knee pads. Now, of all the finishing moves and how they relate specifically to the significations of the sign, I absolutely love the $1 Million Dream, which is him putting a sleeper hold on someone. So the ruling planet of Capricorn is Saturn. Restriction, restraining, actually restraining the oxygen to their head, or the blood to their head in general. And it's a little harsher to restrict the oxygen to the lungs, but the blood to the head so that they would pass out. This is very Saturnian. He also, they played on these dark, horrible traditions in American history of slavery by he had a black valet and he treated him like garbage. And they worked that for a long time, playing on slavery motifs, which is a dangerous move to do, but they popped the audience so hard when Virgil finally turned on Ted DiBiase. But there's a Capricornian of control and structure there. It was part of the gimmick for sure. Despite some of the more disturbing gimmicks Piper used to promote his status as a heel and a villain, he also showed the more gallant knight-like qualities of Aries when he was performing as a face, where he actually became like a mentor to Virgil to help him rebel against Ted DiBiase, which again, we see the cardinal square there between Capricorn and Aries. Enough with the hard aspects for now. Let's take a nice easy sextile where we're not going from mode to mode or element to element. There's actually little in common with the sextile, other than the fact that they're going to be the same yin or yang. So we're going from Capricorn to Pisces, both feminine signs, both yin signs. Ted DiBiase and Ric Flair. Woo! And what's interesting about the sextile is that there's a similarity in cause when it comes to feminine versus masculine sign. And there's a similarity in the light balance. But other than that, they're different enough that it's a very constructive aspect. Sextiles tend to work together because one sign will be more motivating to the other in the capacities that they tend to lack. And Ric Flair said that he enjoyed working with Ted DiBiase more than anyone else. Those were his favorite matches. So here you go. Here's the sextile between DiBiase and Ric Flair. Now, this is another one that when I was learning astrology, I was watching a documentary about Ric Flair. And there was a scene where he just started crying. He started sobbing. And it was just, that's Pisces. I knew he was a Pisces. It was so obvious. Nobody cries like a Pisces. We've got the fish imagery and this certain Pisces at one of its most extreme ends can be this like savior complex, where when a Pisces really cries, it's like it's almost like they're Christ on the cross. They're crying for all the sins of everyone in the world. It's almost like this intense experience of sobbing out all the pain and misery in the world. I mean, that's an extreme end of Pisces, but Ric Flair's known to sob openly a lot. Now, Pisces is a water sign. It's mutable, and it's ruled by Jupiter. Don't let that one fool you. It's ruled by Jupiter. Ric Flair lived his life to excess. He lived his life to Jupiterian's excess. He had a different suit of clothes for every appearance he made. He spent like half his fortune on clothes, period. Because he was portraying the nature boy. He was portraying this image of luxury and wealth and success and the party-hardy lifestyle. And he lived it. He lived it. And again, this is Jupiterian excess. He drank every day. He drank to excess every day and still made his matches and made these incredible matches. But what's his signature in the ring? What is the Nature Boy's signature in the ring? You want to know what it is? It's overselling. It blows your mind when you realize what a Piscean archetype his wrestling style is. When he gets hit in the ring, when his opponent does a move on Ric Flair, he has numerous comedically overblown ways of overselling where he'll walk away and boom, straight head down. Incredible. And it's funny, but it's plays into this Piscean where, like, you know, the Pisces energy at its one of its more negative ramifications is someone who oversells how hurt they are, or blows up some minor slight into a huge issue. But because it's mutable, which is the end of the season, and no, we're just beginning our mutable journey here. Oh, this is the first mutable we're talking about, isn't it? Because it comes at the end of the season. This is where the season is changing, mutable energy. And Pisces can get very hurt and very upset about things, but they get over it quickly. And again, isn't this Ric Flair's wrestling style? Isn't this what we see? And the style of him strutting around the ring, and the way that he talks, and the way he connects with an audience. No, here we are in the winter. It's the final sign in the winter. So Yin is still ruling this sign, but Yang is on the rise. We're about to hit the equinox. So there's a lot of independence within the sign of Pisces going to do their own thing, but overall they're still ruled by the group. And, you know, Ric Flair was all about getting his posse out and getting his posse together and buying drinks for the whole bar and having that party. Ric Flair also exhibited one of the more negative connotations with Pisces, because having the Venus exaltation there and Jupiter ruled and being water, Pisces really has that quality of being able to fall in love with anyone at any moment. And so they tend to get a bit of a bad reputation for being a little bit promiscuous, perhaps. Ric Flair made that a core part of his character. He was a womanizer, indeed. His retirement match, at least the first one, he gave to Shawn Michaels, and it's this beautiful moment, this connection between the two, where they're kind of breaking kayfabe in a way where, you know, it's like if he loses, he has to retire. And he came back anyways, but because this guy, Jupiter, there's no end to it. Actually, I want to point this out. Ric Flair is an amazing example of how Jupiter is the true ruler of Pisces instead of Neptune. Think about it. And so the end of this match, because if he loses, he has to retire, Shawn Michaels mouths, "I'm sorry, I love you," before he super kicks him and takes the win. So even in his match, there's this emotional component where this water, Pisces, it's very beautiful. Pisces is mutable. So you can see how Ric Flair's career changed through the years, what level of heel and babyface he was. In a way, he's one of the original anti-heroes because people loved him so much, despite the fact that he was generally a heel. And in astrology, everything has a positive and a negative element to it. So with the trine, even though it tends to be a very easy aspect with elements working together, we still see Ric Flair saying that he hated working with Savage. He said he loved the intensity of his performance, the water, the Scorpio water, but he absolutely hated that Savage wanted to plan everything out in his matches because he was fixed. He wanted everything strategized down to the minutia. Whereas, being mutable, Ric Flair wanted to improvise in the ring. Mutable wants to just go with the flow, and he felt that the problem with Savage's wrestling style was that if the match wasn't working properly, he didn't feel like Savage would be able to react to that and change things in the moment to get the crowd back into it, whereas Ric Flair was all about connecting with the crowd. So Ric Flair is one element of charisma in creating a character and living that character. We need a square to get a different perspective on the type of charisma that you can play out a wrestling character. So we're going to jump to Gemini now, which is maximum independence. This is maximum yang energy, is Gemini. It's the sign right before the summer solstice. Geminis are the most independent and selfish people of the zodiac. And they make some of the most interesting wrestlers of all time. I'm going to focus on two because it's Gemini and it's the twins, and I can do whatever I want. So I want to first talk about mankind. So we're kind of jumping out of the era that I've been doing this whole thing in. I'm going to another era. I mean, I'd kind of stopped watching wrestling at this point, so this is something that I've learned afterwards, digging back into this history a little bit. Well, I will bring up mankind because it portrays one of the main things people have sort of a problem with about Gemini, and it's very misunderstood, which is this idea of them having multiple personalities. So Mick Foley as a Gemini winds up having 3 to 4 distinct personalities, to the point where there's a Royal Rumble where he comes in as each of his 3 main characters: Cactus Jack, Mankind, and Dude Love. Because Gemini is Mercury ruled. It's mutable. Mercury is this logical ability to talk, the charisma of Mercury, especially in Gemini as an air sign, which is also very much about communication. This is also the first air sign we're going to talk about. So there's an ability to really be able to get your point out in Gemini, especially. And Mick Foley cut these amazing promos and played the trickster archetype with some incredible pranks in terms of a whole point where he went from being this hardcore wrestler and where he was going to do Greco wrestling, Olympic rules only wrestling. Amazing trickster character. And Mankind's finisher, be that as it may, was having his hand in a sock puppet and cramming it down the person's throat, seemingly, as far as I'm concerned, to stop them from being able to talk, because he wanted to, as a Gemini, just continue to dominate the conversation. But I don't really want to go too deep into Mick Foley because we're going outside of the timeline. I'm going to go back to my favorite wrestler from when I was a fan, which is Jake the Snake Roberts. This is a totally separate type of charisma from the exuberant Piscean, Jupiterian energy of Ric Flair. Jake the Snake mastered the quiet promo where he was whispering into the mic and he scared you to the depths of your soul. It's phenomenal what he would do in those promos. Go back and watch some. He changed wrestling in that way. And again, it was this Gemini element. Now here's another fascinating thing about Gemini wrestlers. They're some of the hardest wrestlers to guess their sun signs, because the whole idea with Gemini is there's this mutable element to the personality and to how they portray themselves in the world. Legendarily two-faced, people say, but what they don't understand is that it has to do with understanding two sides of a point and being able to, at its best, logically argue both sides of that point and see the value in each one. But because Gemini is an air sign, so there's a communicative social element to it, but also maximum yang energy, Gemini tends to pick and choose what they show to people at what time. And so this is why Geminis, as wrestlers, create some of the most interesting characters, because it's a complete fabrication. Jake, most interestingly, said to me, in terms of this maximum yang energy, he said about his character, of course, his name was Aurelian Smith. His name was not Jake the Snake. Jake the Snake is a character he played. He said, Jake the Snake doesn't care about anything. Jake the Snake doesn't care about anyone. Jake the Snake just cares about Jake the Snake. Well, that's maximum yang energy right there, the most selfish sign, right? So he played that out, but he was also a genius of just gimmicks and marketing gimmicks and coming up with different ideas for matches and different ideas for his character. And he actually became a booker, and he had a lot of substance abuse problems and such, and had to step away from the business for a long time as his physicality deteriorated. They put him into a role where he was booking, and if he could have kept it together, he would have been so brilliant in that. Because I'm going to tell you about my very favorite wrestling moment of all time. I was a little boy. It was a Sunday afternoon. Sundays, it's always a Sunday. And I was watching. Now, Jake the Snake, his gimmick is he has a snake, right? puts the snake on the opponent. So anytime he has a feud with someone, suddenly they're deathly afraid of snakes. It was done so many times. It was overdone. But he's got a feud with Earthquake, who is just a brilliant character. He was a brilliant wrestler. One of the most underused wrestlers of all time. He should have been their main heel, but he didn't like being a heel. I'm going on a tangent here. At any rate, I'm watching this episode, and I know it's fake. Don't forget, I know it's fake. And at the beginning of the ring, Earthquake says, I'm not doing this match because I'm too afraid of the snake. The snake needs to be out of the ring. And so they come to a compromise. And the ref makes Jake put the bag under the ring. So I already get what's about to happen. I get a sense of where this is going. And so Earthquake gets Jake tied up in the ropes. Okay? And then goes down and gets the bag out of the ring. So I already know whatever horror is about to happen, it's not the real snake. And I loved snakes as a kid. I was very into reptiles. And he puts him in the ring. And he runs back and forth, and he does this earthquake splash, which is a big move, where he just slams his butt down. He squishes the bag, and blood leaks out of the bag, and Jake is just horrified. And even though I knew it was fake, and I even knew how the very cheap magic trick was done, I was horrified. I couldn't get over it. It was stuck in my brain. Now that's Jake the Snake Mars. He was amazing. And if we talk about the physical significations of Gemini, it's the arms and the lungs. And one of Jake's moves was he would grab someone with one arm and give them a short clothesline. And his main moves were quick. There was a quickness to them, which is Gemini. Mercury is the quickest planet. It darts back and forth. There's the retrograde motion of Mercury, which we're in retrograde right now, and you have no idea how this one's doing my head in. I didn't even believe Mercury retrograde was a big deal until this week, but I'm recording a video for you. Mercury retrograde and all the attendant misery that entails. But even his quick clothesline has a certain... They'd go this way and there's a certain amount of Mercury retrograde action in that motion. And his main move was the DDT, which, again, with this Gemini communication theme, he would signal to the audience before he'd do it. He would communicate with them. And then he would get them, and he would tap their back, and bang, they were down. And the whole point of the move that made it look good was the quickness of it. The messenger planet, darting in and out. Incredible. And he also would change his character at times. He was always Jake the Snake, but he was smart enough to know that he had to drift into heel and babyface territory. And so at a certain point, he became a preacher character and found Jesus and found God. So we have this whole other Jake the Snake, which winds up being one of the key moments where the WWE, when it got to its lowest point in viewership, when WCW was winning, this one moment changed the whole game, where Jake has a match at King of the Ring with... So again, we're stepping outside of my wheelhouse. I wasn't really around for this. But I remember what a huge cultural phenomenon Stone Cold Steve Austin was. My high school was full of people wearing Austin 316, which surprised me that a teenager would be proud to watch wrestling. I didn't understand that it had been boosted to this other level and that they went into a more R-rated terrain and everything. I was in another plane at that point. But basically, the whole Austin 316 moment comes from Austin winning this match, this King of the Ring against Jake the Snake, and at the end, him using that and saying, you may talk about your John 316, Austin 316 said, I just whooped your... Edited, because I don't know what's appropriate or not. So I'm just going super safe here. And that changed the game. That boosted him to this whole other level of character. And what's fascinating, that him getting his big move was out of religion. Because Austin was a Sagittarius. Huh. Opposed to Gemini. Given over to be sort of a preacher archetype in some manifestations. Jupiter ruled again. There's an element, the image of Sagittarius is the archer with the bow, the centurion specifically, but an archer with a bow aiming at something. Sagittarius needs to have an aim, and the aim is high because it's Jupiter ruled, and fire ruled as well. Don't forget, Sagittarius is the most yin sign in the zodiac. Shocking, I know. Right before the winter solstice, it's the maximum yin energy, but it's fire. Because if you had a feminine sign in the most yin moment of the zodiac, they'd be almost too mutable and too manipulated. No, the structure of our cosmos is so genius and brilliant, the mind that fabricated all of this, that this mind put a fire sign in the most yin moment to counteract the energy of that yin. And you can see, Sag, these are people that always need other people in their lives. They're always gathering people around themselves. I mean, I had a close Sag friend in high school, and he had to go to every party. He had to go to 4 or 5 parties a night. He couldn't just do one party because he had to see everybody. He couldn't just pick and choose the way that, a Cancer might. These are my people. This is who I'm going to see tonight. And so we have here, he actually, Stone Cold boosts his career based specifically on religion. That's his motto. But the archer aiming at something, this guy knew that he was going to be the best and the biggest his whole life. He aimed at it and he actually got it. Just because you aim doesn't mean you get it. But you don't get it if you don't aim. Ever. But one of the more interesting things here for me is that Sagittarius, being Jupiter ruled and fire, is the most honest sign. This is a sign that aims for the truth and to uncover the biggest truths. To uncover the large scale, bigger philosophical concepts of everything. And as it's so honest, Sag is legendarily known to be extremely offensive because they just fiery say the thing, and they'd rather say the thing that's offensive than beat around the bush. And Stone Cold made it clear, or I shouldn't even say Stone Cold, I should say Steve Austin, made it clear that he was that character. If he was going to be Stone Cold, he had to live it, he had to be it. More than anyone else, that was real to him. And of course, another signification of Sagittarius that everyone knows is the intense propensity to cursives. And Stone Cold was one of the main people that ushered in this Attitude Era of WWE, where they started cursing and he was chugging beer. Again, Jupiter ruled. His whole thing was chugging beer. One of his biggest gimmick was chugging beer and throwing it at the audience and chugging beer, and he would fight anyone, and he was just doing his own thing. He'd take all comers. And in a very saggy way, Stone Cold would want to chug a beer with someone, kick him in the stomach, give him a stunner, and then fight them, have a match, and then later on they'd be friends and they'd tag up. Very saggy. Let's fight it out and who cares? Let's get back to being friends. Very Sagittarius energy. Steve had a serious problem being given gimmicks that he didn't like, that he didn't appreciate. And so he felt he knew deep down he needed black. He needed to wear all black. That was his vibe. And I find that interesting because, again, maximum yin, Sagittarius is the darkest sign of the zodiac. Now, another interesting element of all this is maybe we should talk about another square. Why don't we just stick with the mutable energy? What am I left with in mutable? Oh, Virgo. Do we know a wrestler, prominent character in the WWE? That's Virgo? Oh yeah, Mr. McMahon. Who actually said he didn't like Steve Austin to start off with. He said he didn't like his accent and he couldn't understand what he was about. So, again, I think I mentioned two of the other most prominent feuds of all time. This is maybe the number one most watched feud of all time is Mr. McMahon and Steve Austin. And this is past my time. No, I mean, I've considered trying, but I know you got to watch all those Raws, and I kind of want to see this because I saw what a huge cultural phenomenon it was, and I just wasn't paying attention. But I know people love it to this day. The common man against his boss, the Sag saying whatever was on his mind with no concern about the consequences and coming out on top, of course. Mr. McMahon of Virgo. This is intense because we see another Mercury ruled sign, the thinking, the ideas, and it's mutable. It's always changing. Mercury rules the mutable signs and Jupiter rules the mutable signs. But Vince was legendary at continuously finicking with what he was doing. He would change endings right up to the last minute, constantly rethinking things. Very Virgoan energy. Virgos like to find the best way because it's Earth ruled. Gemini is air ruled Mercury. Virgo is Earth ruled Mercury. So where Gemini is about all the ideas and just about going for it, Virgo is maximum yin in the summer, right before the equinox, coming off. So there's still a yang energy to Virgo. That's the prominent energy, but it's about to change to yin. And what does Vince do? He goes against his father's wishes, takes his territory, and changes the entire game, changes the entire industry. Willing to upset his father and the natural order of things, he starts poaching guys from every territory. You can see, even though it's moving towards the group, he's trying to build an empire with people. It's still about his own glory and his own, what he needs for himself. That's still the predominant energy there. And while Vince had very particular tastes and likes in what he wanted to do, in the end he was able to change with the times. He was able to allow the Attitude Era to happen even though he didn't get it and he didn't think that's where wrestling was going. He'd already changed wrestling by making it so PG and started to ban blood on TV and just anything he could do to make it kid-friendly. Marketing cartoons and kids shows. And even just the mutable fact that he went from, now we're talking about his character here, he went from being just an announcer with other characters playing the general manager and the owner, and well, there wasn't really an owner, but the general manager was a different character. So he was just an announcer. So he was on screen, he had his hand in the pie, but he wasn't the star. Virgo doesn't really want to be the star. The whole idea of the virgin, of the shy virgin, there's an element of that with Virgo, although they're Mercury ruled, so they like to talk, but they're not as outgoing and as in your face as a Gemini energy is. So he starts out as the announcer. Eventually, with all these controversies and him being in the news with the steroid scandal and all these things, becomes the owner. It becomes known that he's the owner as kayfabe starts to crumble, and he takes on that role that he's the owner, and then realizes that the best way to be the owner is to become the villain, to become the boss villain. Everyone hates their boss. So he does that, and he does it to a degree that boosts his company to the stratosphere, to the constellations themselves, how huge WWE was at that time. It's incredible. And by showing himself to be so evil, he made himself beloved by everybody. It's what a mutable trick that was. And Earth is practical, so he was able to make this practical billion-dollar industry and make it work for an amazing amount of time. But with this Virgo micromanaging energy, I mean, we all know the nitpicky Virgo. When they're doing their broadcasts, he's in the ears of the announcers telling them what to say. He has his fingers in every pot trying to micromanage everything. Can you imagine trying to be in the moment and natural and having your boss telling you, oh, you got to talk about this, you got to talk about that in your ear? And so some announcers left because they couldn't handle it. And sadly, as far as I'm concerned, modern day wrestling, one of the biggest detriments of what they're doing with their product these days, because I've poked my nose in a little bit now, is the announcing is not the same as it was back in the day. When you had a heel announcer and a face announcer and they were just going at it, and the heel announcer is trying to explain why all the bad things the heel does is good, and the baby face announcer is trying to undercut the illegal things the baby face does in the ring, because Oh man, the morality of wrestling, pretty gray. It's pretty gray to begin with. That was magic. That was fun. That was amazing. But the Virgoan nature of Vince McMahon is prominent, part of his character. Which leaves us, we have 2 more signs that we haven't talked about yet. Kind of wanted to end on Vince McMahon, but I had a problem here. I had a serious problem. When it came to wrestlers showing these archetypes of their characters, I had 2 signs that I couldn't place down. And it's not to say that these 2 signs didn't have amazing wrestlers with their sun in these signs, but they just didn't really manifest the significations of that solar energy as the wrestling characters. Like, I wanted to find maybe a prominent referee like Earl Hebner, who's a wrestling character in his own right and played into very important storylines. If he'd been a Libra, well, I would have had something to go on there, wouldn't I? The judge. Oh, that would have been interesting. Unfortunately, I just couldn't quite get there. And the 2 signs that I couldn't get there are Aquarius and Libra. The sun is in fall in Libra and in detriment in Aquarius. So these wrestlers, because of the detriment of the sun there, couldn't solely rely on that energy to create their characters. They had to dig deeper into their charts. My mind was blown by this. Now, I don't view Sun in Libra or Sun in Aquarius as an inherently bad thing. There are amazing qualities to both those signs and having the sun in those signs. But there is an interpretive quality there that you have to take into account. And so they had to dig into other elements of their chart. They couldn't rely on their sun to make these characters. Dusty Rhodes came close as a Libra. I couldn't quite get there in the end, though. Dusty Rhodes had this common man character. Hard times! Got hard times! Which, to a certain extent, because when the short amount of time that he was in the WWE, he was in a feud with Ted Dibiase, the $1 Million Man. There was a square there. Cardinal Libra. Cardinal Libra, the scales, is all about bringing balance to the force. He wanted to bring another perspective in, and so he always had a character, and there were some people who've talked about that he was actually this way, that he wanted equality and he fought for equality for people in the locker room and behind the scenes. But he wanted the common man to have his due, and he wanted that message out there. So it was a conflict with wealth and power. This is Libra, wanting the opposite viewpoint to be shown. So it came close. He certainly had a Venusian style in how he communicated with the audience, because Libra's also Venus ruled, though in an air sign it's more about relationships. He was extremely charismatic, and even with a bigger figure, so again we have sort of a Venusian overindulgence theme going on, which is common to both benefics. That's kind of interesting. He knew how to connect with an audience, even though he didn't have a typical wrestler's figure and was one of the biggest stars of all time. But still, he clearly had to dig into other elements of his chart in order to make that character work. If we look at Aquarius, we see where the sun is in detriment, and I kind of came close on Honky Tonk Man, a little bit. A little bit, because he had one of the longest runs on the Intercontinental Championship title. Now this is the mid-level title, right? This isn't the great glory of a Leo Golden World Champion. We're talking mid-carder. So, you know, it's another way to kind of slowly move up. And in Aquarius, this is a group-oriented people, but the momentum is towards independence. So being the second sign ruled by Saturn, Aquarians want to take structure, and with the air element of Aquarius, they want to use that structure to build something new that works for the community, that works for everybody. And an interesting part of Honky Tonk Man's run as Intercontinental Champion was his whole strategy was to just keep running out of the ring and getting counted out and just walking away from the match, which is why he had such a long run with the belt. Which is fascinating, because if the sun is in detriment in Aquarius, it's not about personal glory. It's not about, look how great I am. It's like, well, I'll just keep the belt and that's good for business. And people love hating a heel. And so he was doing the right thing for the company, right? Interesting. Fascinating. Go outside at the end of January. And the Hart Aquarius season. On a sunny day, and try to feel the sun. It's almost like it's not there. This is the sun in detriment. It's hard to shine. But again, these two, there are other great wrestlers with these signs, but they just don't quite manifest all the archetypes in the same manner. They had to dig into other elements of their chart. And it seems like maybe Vince McMahon knew all this. He really did seem to align himself to astrological archetypes to build his entire empire. And he grew a regional business into this giant, epic thing. Maybe he actually did know what he was doing. I did find this one meme, which sort of implies, I don't know, implies a little something something. I don't know, is it reality? Whew. Serious stuff right there. But you know, these were the heroes of my youth. These were the Greek gods or the demigods at least, that I looked up to, and these were mythic stories that you watch play out over weeks and months that you got totally wrapped up in. And in my mind still, these are huge archetypal figures, and they do display these great just traits of the sun in every sign. I grew up wanting to be these heroes. But at a certain point, you know, I grew out of it. It was around the time that Papa Shango and Undertaker came up, and these supernatural occult gimmicks were coming into play. And while I always knew the thing was acted and fake to a certain extent, or staged is a better word, it was too much for me to suspend disbelief and enjoy it. It was a little silly, and you know, all this occult magical powers and energies coming in from other places, and I couldn't continue to watch it. I had to grow up and walk away from superstitious silliness. And look at me now! Foolishness. At any rate, I wish I could become Andre the Giant, who truly stole my heart, who truly still has it. I could maybe find some sort of ritual that could bring him back into reality. I just need the right electional chart. I just need to... Oh, Jupiter on the ascendant. Try and accentuate a little Taurus in there. Oh, Jupiter's in Taurus right now, isn't it? Oh, I know. I know.
のでコリコリしてんだからいいね
I will crush Pony, human little man. Yo, subscribe, like, follow, do up. No, I'm the best YouTube astrologer. You like, subscribe, share video, or I will beat you entirely. And if there's one thing that giant likes, it gets you in the ropes.
He loves the ropes. He loves the ropes. He loves the ropes. He loves the ropes. He loves the ropes. He loves the ropes. He just loves the ropes. He just can't get enough of them ropes. He's always going up to them ropes. Giving them the love of his large body on the ropes. He's always getting up in them ropes. He loves the ropes. He loves the ropes. He just loves the ropes. Getting so so sensual with those robes. Andre. He likes touching the robes. Andre. He likes leaning against them robes. Andre. He likes loving the robes. He loves the